to form human culture around the principle of maximal harmony within community and relationship to nature, that is a spiritual proposition.
Bingo. That's oneness. That's oneness beyond the spiritual conceptualization and woo-woo-ness. It's like literally, it's a shared breath. The air, the water, like the water that lands on the watershed where I live, the hydrological cycle, it's sharing everything. Everything that's put into the air, into the water, is being moved around and affecting everybody. You cannot fundamentally privatize anything, in my opinion. We do not own anything. We do not even own our own breath. That's an experience of connectivity that gives deep responsibility for how we affect everything. I want to take the steps to plant the seeds for this way of being, maybe for my grandkids. Maybe it's for my great-great-great-great-grandkids. I might not see the revolution, so to speak, of the human spirit and human connection with each other in the natural world and that shifting in values. I might not see that in my life. I see it happening. I see it happening in my little community and like with you and these conversations we're having and stuff like this. And we have to just stay focused on living true against all odds and hopefully just planting the seeds. Like just put in the work so that it can just be continued on, because it's just a continuation on. It just keeps going.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Conscious Grounding Podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel, where we're having elevated conversations kept way down to earth. And today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Tim Matz. Tim is someone who I feel really grateful to be able to call a friend, someone who I look to as a reminder to ground myself in my own humanity with my feet firmly on the ground. He's a father, a husband, a traditional bow hunter, and a multidisciplinary movement coach whose approach brings people back to their biological roots, as you might expect when you see his Instagram handle, Move Like Human. His mission is to demystify and simplify how we care for ourselves, help people build real-world strength and capability, living healthy and pain-free. Disillusioned by seeing people get sicker and weaker as we become more disconnected from nature and each other, Tim asks the questions, what does it mean to be human? What does a human eat? How should a human move? How should a human relate with nature and the elements? And most importantly, what kind of community does a human need to thrive? Integrating holistic health practices with deep bond building, Tim teaches his community from the philosophy of revillaging, because it takes a village to navigate this human life that we found ourselves in. And today we're going to talk about how we can grow stronger together. And this is one of the first podcasts that I've done on conscious grounding where I didn't have a whole set of questions that I wanted to ask the person. Tim is just one of my favorite people to talk to in general. And I want to talk about like just what it means to be a human and let the conversation flow in the most human way possible. So dude, thanks for being on the show. I'm really, really stoked to jam with you today.
My pleasure, buddy. Thank you for having me.
I'd love to start with a first principles understanding of what your approach is. And, you know, I mentioned that your philosophy is rooted in this idea of revillaging. For people who have never heard that term, could you give a working principle definition of that for anyone who's new to you and your ideas?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with how we've spent most of our time here on the planet, as far as I know. And when I look at our species and I look at the world around me, I feel like it's so obvious that there is this major divorce between us and the environment that we developed on this planet, all the relationships. And one of those relationships being our community. And I feel like more and more, especially today for me, the importance of community, that intimacy bred through living interdependently with our neighbor and fully interwoven into the landscape is the best we can be in a world where we've been so removed from our habitat, I think solves for so many of the issues that we see. And I think that, you know, we spend so much time trying to biohack ourselves back to balance, and all of it is just an attempt at creating that, giving ourselves the inputs that would naturally come from when we lived interwoven into the landscape. Mm-hmm. And so revillaging is, I think, the way of human community. And I think that we have been taught that we are so special as an individual. And it's not that we aren't, but it's that our net worth, our value is so intimately connected to how we support the other and how we interact with the landscape, that which feeds us. And so I think it's the most important thing. I think it's at the heart of what our original purpose may be, so to speak. Like there's so much emphasis on the individual today, especially in the West. And maybe it's not like this in other places in the world, and it certainly wasn't that way not that long ago in the span of human evolution. So it's always been, how we moved, how we ate, where we lived, the living, the dying, all of it was really around place. And that our ability to subsist in a place was always dependent on our cooperation with the other, and our ability to have a zoomed out view of our impact on the environment, because that environment's going to feed our grandbabies and their grandbabies and their grandbabies. And so having this lens where we make decisions based on how it impacts our neighbor and the more than human world, which I think has been so removed from how we view ourselves. Like there's no separation really. Like we share a breath with all of the flora and the fauna. It's one breath. It's not even a woo-woo thing. It's just really matter of fact. Literally, I exhale and these trees inhale, and we're in reciprocity, whether we can see it or not. And I think that when we can actually change our view to where instead of us, this individual, projecting out into the world and viewing things and this and that, but we can actually start to turn that lens around and realize that when we step out into the world, we're literally being perceived by an endless amount of sentient life. Like literally the trees, everything's responding to us coming out into the world. And I think that that's a part of revillaging. It's not just about humans. It's about the more than human world, mostly, because that's what sustains us, right? And I think that's why traditional cultures have always been in such awe of the more than human world and worship the stones and worship the sun and, and had such a deep reverence for this circle way of living. And I think that it's an antidote to the deep loneliness and disconnect that people feel. When you step out into the natural world and you start to recognize these different plants, these plant beings and animal beings, their names, their patterns, how they feed you, and how you feed them in some way. And that gives you a deep sense of place, and that gives you a sense of belonging on the planet. And I think what I really want to do is encourage people to find their belonging. And I want people to know that they belong on this planet and to cherish this planet. And I feel deeply at home on this planet. And I don't think a lot of people feel that way. And I don't feel like I'm special in any way. Like I'm not the strongest. I'm definitely not the fastest. I'm not the smartest. I'm just a pretty average guy. I wasn't born into any particular tradition. It's like my grandma was an orphan from Russia. It's like I consider myself a cultural orphan, but I've found such deep sense of belonging and place in this world. And I know that it's because of how I've prioritized the non-human world and cultivating myself for that bigger picture from the lens of like, how is the human animal supposed to be on this planet? Where do we fit into the ecosystem? And so I don't have the manual on revillaging. I think that revillaging is it's a like seed. And I think that this is the beginning of like people who also recognize our place in the natural world and this interdependence that we have, whether we are aware of it and whether we nurture that or not. It's a part of us. And like, I want everyone to come into the conversation around revillaging and figure out how can we, in light of the cards we've been dealt and how the modern world has evolved. Like everything just is the way it is, right? And these are the cards we were dealt. Like, how do we still cater to our biology and these biological imperatives, the need for community, the need for intimacy, the need for deep knowing of living and dying and all of that in a way that is reciprocal and thinks about how the impacts for the future. I think that's an important question.
I'm hearing so many really good threads that I want to follow. And if I'm going to reflect back some of the things that I heard, I'm hearing three major threads in sort of your philosophy, which is one is oriented around natural health and as opposed to biohacking. I kind of had the same realization with biohacking. Like, I feel like biohacking is just sort of like a mechanical reproduction of everything that we would have experienced in nature. We got these grounding mats that you plug in and you sleep on when it's like put your bare feet on the goddamn ground. You got these red light therapy devices, which I use and I love them, but it's like go out in the sunrise and sunset and you're getting the same infrared frequencies with the same hormonal benefits. It's all of these things that are meant to replicate what would naturally happen if you were living closer to nature. So there's like a health perspective of like how would you naturally move if you were more connected to how human beings were blueprinted to move or to
Hmm.
exist. Then there's the element of relationship, right? So there's the actual when the word that you used is interdependent. And you mentioned that, we're in a hyper individualistic sort of culture, at least in North America, where self actualization and, the sense of purpose that one derives is about how they distinguish themselves from others. They want to maximize and capitalize on their uniqueness. They want to understand and individuate from the group, and through individuating from the group they want to like almost assert their will and assert their individuality and assert their separateness and their specialness. And that is where people derive a sense of purpose, where it's like I have to produce my da da da, it's like it's very me centric, I centric, as opposed
Hmm.
to the sense of purpose that you're describing in a revillaging perspective is you develop your sense of purpose through interdependent relationship where your roles within a community and the way that you benefit other people and you benefit the natural environment and you feed back into an overall system and you start to care more about something that is beyond just the scope of your individual self. That is where all these people are like, so what's my purpose, what's my meaning, like you look at a Google search history and how many people search how do I find my life purpose, how do I find my meaning, is because they're trying to individuate themselves and try to capitalize and maximize on who they think they are as an individual. And, I run a community called Collective Individuation, which I do
Hmm.
believe is like the individual needs to understand how are they an individual? How are they able to separate themselves from cultural conditioning? How are they able to separate themselves from the traumas that they experience? And how can they discover and understand the essence of themselves? We have to do that collectively and then understand ourselves both within relationship to self and relationship to other. So that element of interdependence, I think, is really, really big. And it's something that I struggle with too. Like I notice there's a huge collective wound because everyone's trying to, individuate in this like very selfish way, this self-oriented way that we have a lot of trust issues when it feels more competitive when we try to collaborate with each other. It's like there's all kinds of like weird things that inhibit people from experiencing true collaboration, true loyalty, true community, and even just how disconnected we are in a localized sense. Like in on the internet we've been able to connect in deep ways. You and I have never met in person, but I consider you a friend, right? And we've been able to connect and develop this sort of sense of community and this exchange of energy, this exchange of value. But like I don't get to just wake up and like walk down the street and see how you and your kids are doing, or like,
Yeah.
it's not something that I get to experience in terms of directly benefiting you and your family, right?
Exactly.
And there's a bit of a wounding around that, and I think that's
Hmm.
actually a big reason probably why a lot of your content, when you started sharing more online, your audience kind of blew up really really quickly. I think through that collective wound was really felt, and what
Hmm.
were you sharing was like really resonating with people. So that element of community was, and relationship in particular, was really important.
Mm.
And then nature, like nature as like the main thread, and to understand that we come from nature and that we are not just man is not an island unto himself, but he's not an island unto the species of humanity either. We exist in the context of this sort of natural ecosystem which
Mm.
produces and sustains life, and our disconnection from that not only causes ecological issues but also like suffering within the soul of man. And
Yes.
so these are some of the threads that I hear that are really really powerful. And I got into, it's funny because a lot of people connected with me online through a marketing capacity. And a lot of the systems thinking that are developed for marketing in terms of like, here's your social media ecosystem, here's your email ecosystem, here's all these different like things, is when I was younger, I was studying agriculture because I had this big moral issue around whether or not I should eat meat. You know, I saw the Cowspiracy documentaries. I was looking at the veganism thing, and I got really sick eating as a vegan. So I started studying agriculture, and I learned about guys like Joel Salatin. I learned about a guy named Gabe Brown who was using holistic livestock management to regenerate soil. And that path of like understanding and learning about guys like Alan Savory, who like sort of pioneered holistic livestock management, and that led me to this idea of permaculture systems design, where you're basically creating these closed loop ecological systems that produce a yield with little to no waste.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a paradigm shift for me, where it's like, oh, this is just what occurs in nature, and human beings do not do this. Like we do, like in the modern world, we are not doing this. And I ended up reading like in 1,000-page book by this guy named Bob Waldrop called iPermy, and he talked about how you can incorporate permaculture principles into urban environments. And it was the first time I'd heard people not kind of talk about it from the perspective of like, hey, get out of these city centers, get out and like get off grid and like start a homestead and like, you know, start farming, and talking about like, well, the reality is we have all these human beings living in the cities. How do we apply these principles and put them into an urban center? And these are some bigger issues that we kind of are contending with, because like, you know, from a villaging perspective, it's like, it's a great idea if we still had like populations that were small enough to produce these little villages, and we could kind of gather around and we could start building these like smaller villages. And like the human population tends to concentrate in these cities, and we're stacked on top of each other literally in these like apartment buildings, and there's all sorts of other logistical challenges and issues in terms of like developing a relationship to nature itself, because cities don't accommodate that, but then also developing that sort of interconnected, interdependent village style relationship. These are all like existential questions of how do we apply this to the broader society, hey? And so you've been offering sort of different things in an online community. What's that experience been like for you? And what are some of the challenges and experiences that people in your online community have come up as they start to learn some of these principles?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a big one is the lack of actual boots on the ground community, is what I hear from people that are in my community. And they're definitely getting some nourishment from being in there and having some, you know, finding some reprieve in a community that has shared values. And I do my best, and I see people doing it in ways in there. It's very inspiring around like the idea of revillaging has to be adapted. It can't be everybody going to an off grid community. Although if people feel inspired to do that, I think that's amazing. I live in one, and we can talk about that. But I'm like, a suburban block can become a tiny village. You can be in the heart of suburbia and still step towards your neighbor. You could still make some sourdough and go share it with your neighbor. You can still gather and play some music and help watch each other's children and all this and that, right? And so it's just like, in some way we need to share the burden of life, so to speak. It's just like the weight that raising kids, sustaining ourselves in the way that the modern machine has, you know, the cards we've been dealt. It's just, I think it breaks down the human spirit. And what do we do to fix that? I don't know exactly, but I know that it involves going in the opposite direction. And the internet has us paired against each other, and it has us deeply polarized. It has us afraid of our neighbor. And it's like you go online and you see just like all this propaganda, and then you like go to your local co-op and you're just like, it's just like nice people here, you know? Even if you go to like the regular grocery store, you go in, it's like nice people. Like I go to the 76 gas station and I love all the guys there. Like they're just nice people. Like, and from all sorts of different walks of life. You know, I've friends who exist on all over the political spectrum, and they all live in different locales in the greater Southern Oregon area, and like they all help each other. It's like whether you believe in this or believe in that. Like it always comes down to just humanity, and everybody wants to feel seen and connected and loved, and everybody wants to be safe. And I think that we mostly share things in common is what it comes down to. But we get pinned, it all gets pinned and shaken up in this way where we feel we're so sided against each other. And yeah, I don't know. That's the thing. That's why these conversations I think need to be had. It's like, how do we revillage in an urban setting? How do we turn an apartment complex into a space that cares about itself and all the people within it? How do we provide food for people in a regenerative way who can't live on a farm and things like this? These are important questions. I don't have the answers, but I think that's where we should focus.
Yeah, these are the bigger existential questions that as I look like, I've been thinking in terms of temporal horizons a little bit more, right? And I think that generally our culture looks at, a 5-year plan or quarterly earnings as their general temporal horizons. This is an idea that I learned from a guy named Eric Godsey. It's this great podcast on mythological nutrients and temporal horizons and how far we look into the future. And very seldom do you see someone in the day and age that we're at who's thinking about like, how am I going to be as an ancestor, right? Like what impact are the decisions that I'm making going to affect my grandkids or something along those lines, right? How many people are, it's the old adage, like society becomes great when old men plant trees whose shades they'll never be able to sit under, right? Not many people are planting trees whose shade we're going to be able to sit under. But as I start to look future, like, more into like a broader temporal horizon, it's like, I can see ahead of me. It's like, I have these different business goals. I have these different things that I want to build. I have these different, financial and health goals that I have. But I started to kind of like question them as I put them in context for a broader temporal horizon, where it's like, all right, 5 years from now, I'd like to be here so that I could have a family, but like 50 years from now, when I'm likely dead, realistically, like statistically speaking, in 50 years, I could be dead. God willing, I'm not, but like, I'd love to be like a quirky 80-something-year-old man jumping around. But that far into the future, like what sort of seeds have I planted for, food security, for, investing in technology that contributes to regenerative agriculture as opposed to soil depletion? How have I created cultural paradigms where my children are going to be supported within the context of their broader community? How have I, created, cultural paradigms where there's leadership and co-leadership in my family in terms of like the ways that we communicate? How am I contributing to the overall voice, and how am I going against some of that digital madness, right? So like when you're talking about like, oh, you get online and everyone's at each other's throat, it literally feels like a psychosis or like this spill that people are under when you walk out into the world and everyone's just like, oh, hey, what's up? Everyone's just like smiling at each other, and not everyone's smiling at each other on the streets. If you ever walked around downtown Toronto or downtown France or downtown in some of these cities where people are a little bit more like hustle bustle, but generally speaking, you're not going to have the same level of dissent against one another in the actual physical real world, right? And so how are we encouraging a culture where that's more accessible? A lot of my work, I realized, I've been working online for so long because I had this dream of being this digital nomad where I could, pop my laptop and like travel all over the place. And more than ever in my life, I'm like, man, I just want like a house, and I want neighbors, and I want to like drive to the store and see the same people. And I want to like start building a community, and I want to connect to farmers, and I want to start, investing in like regenerative agriculture research and technologies, and I want to start putting together these systems, and I want to help build a community and like be able to create some sort of thing that's going to, long term, make sure that our grandkids have healthy organic food that they can eat.
Yeah, man, I want to import you down to my community. I'm ready for you to move down here. You're perfect. you have the right my kind of lens.
Yeah, and so let's talk about your lens a little bit more, right? Because you actually live in community right now. And what are the ways that you find your sense of interdependence, is expressed in your community? Like what does interdependence mean in your community?
Well, Yeah, I don't think that where I live right now in my little community, my community is bigger than the land that I live on, and so we'll talk. We'll zoom out from there. But here, on the land where I live, there's a number of families who've known each other for at least 10 years, and a number of the kids have been born here on the land, including my son. Um, and our homes are connected by footpaths, literally. And it's like we don't have sustainable food systems up here. You know, we're up in a mountain valley. We're off grid. We have, we produce some of our own food. We grow a lot of food in the very short growing season up here. We have a giant hothouse for growing food. At times we've had goats. We've had some sheep. We have chickens. Um, our buddy Rob, who lives here, he's very versed in regenerative agriculture, has been in some really cool scenes. So he brings a really cool element. He's like one of the newest people to live here. And I've been enjoying growing closer to him. And he raises rabbits, and he actually built his own Mongolian, or it's a gur traditionally, but a yurt modeled after a Mongolian yurt. He built it from scratch, like literally harvested all the poles, built the lattices, built the crown. He imported the canvas and the insulation, but like, and then he just lives up on the hill right here. And we all support each other in what might seem just like not that big of ways, honestly, but they're so impactful. It's like the little bit of stepping towards each other and supporting each other, like being able to watch kids, so some parents can have a date night, just rides to and from town, like the ability for the kids just to merge in the forest and move from place to place and just have this expansive way of living and connection to other parents and other perspectives, and the comfort we all feel to create boundaries and uphold those with kids that aren't ours, and to love kids that aren't ours like they're our own, is it brings a preciousness to life that I think is just so important, and it's so deeply fulfilling. And you know how it is, like you just go out of your way to help somebody, like you just help someone that you love, and it's like the return on that is so profound, but there's no material gain. You don't have anything you're holding on to, but there's this deep sense of connectivity that brings meaning to life outside of any your net worth or what your legacy is or what you're going to create or your bank account. All that shit doesn't matter, and we don't leave with any of it at the end, right? And so I love how Martin Prechtal is always talking about like cultivating oneself to be an ancestor worth descending from one day. And it's like zooming out and realizing that, like, and I'm a very idealistic guy. I'm very extreme. It's served me well in certain ways, and I've grown to appreciate it. I've grown to appreciate that part of myself as I get older, while also actively letting go and softening to being able to adapt to a world that I see as in disarray and not the way that I'd like it. But I think of like what you're talking about, like planting trees that are going to create shade that I won't be able to be underneath. And I'm trying to live that way. And I think that if we adopted that way of being, then it brings meaning, and because there's a meaning deficit really in our culture. And so that's a really wonderful lens. Okay, getting back to the land where I live.
Can I actually take on that thread a little bit? Because this idea of meaning has kind of been coming up a little bit. And, when I think about this idea of like, we plant the trees that, we're not going to get to sit under their shades. There's obviously like a sense of like continuity and a sense of meaning and purpose beyond our own lives that we're starting to ascribe to. And, I mentioned this guy, Eric Godsey, before, and he uses the metaphor of cathedrals, where there's these multi-generational works of art that, people would start building these cathedrals because they had a sense of meaning and they had a sense of shared purpose and vision that was so strong. They would start building these things that they would never finish. They never lived to see the completion of. And yet, so these multi-generational works of art, but those were inspired by a shared sense of spiritual meaning, right? Like a cathedral is a religious structure. And so there was a shared sentiment of, awe of the divine to build this sort of, reverent temple for this, to while you're talking about meaning, right? Like what I'm hearing is the meaning itself comes from the fact that we're human. The meaning is coming from this shared sense of humanity itself, and that we all have to eat and we all have to have connection. We all have to have intimacy. But do you find that there is a deeper sense of purpose that drives you or connects your community, or that inspires that desire to be a good ancestor to descend from?
I mean, I think that it ultimately, I mean, we can create whatever meaning we want, and people do that, and they find some refuge and purpose in whatever they take on in their world. But I feel like most of the pursuits end up being kind of vapid and ultimately meaningless from the position of like, how have we how have we intrinsically felt meaningful here in the world? And I feel like that was always about our people. It was always about, and our people were never connected from place. And so it was always about people and place. And so I think that the more that we can just take steps towards it's like for the greater good. It's like, do whatever we do it for the greater good. That just brings meaning. When it's just, when it's not just for ourselves, but it's for the other, the more than the non-human world and just other people, it's just, then it's just, it brings fulfillment.
I have a bit of a skepticism towards this idea of serving the greater good, because that's also been used to justify really, really intensely authoritarian and like nasty acts of humanity as well, where it's like, oh, we're going to suppress all your freedoms. We're going to inhibit your ability to like speak out politically of your beliefs, but that's for the greater good, because the small minority of people who are speaking out against this like broader controls. And I'm talking about like, this happens within a corrupt system. I think in principle, obviously, if we had a collective agreement about what the greater good was, and we had shared first principles,
Yeah.
then that would have a shared, that's where I'm kind of asking, is like, where does the anchoring of a shared sense of meaning come from? Because different people have different ideas of what the greater good is. If you're a Christian, you're going to believe that the greater good is that, people believe in Christ and they follow Jesus. If you're, maybe more atheistic, you'd probably have like a more rational view, and you'd look at, oh, the greater good is like looking at efficiency of, food yields and like minimizing ecological waste or whatever it happens to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's the challenge that I see in tying communities together. And I think this is also where some of the individualism comes in, where it's like it's like they want to speak my truth, right? It's like it's all about like, I'm in my truth. I'm in what I believe is right. And that shared sense of meaning and that shared sense of purpose is lost in a way. And I think that is, I read this amazing book several years ago, called Eco Villages, by this woman. I think her name was Karen Litvin. And she traveled the world going to all these different off-grid communities that were self-sustaining communities. And she saw that, a lot of the ones that didn't have that shared sense of spiritual connection had some other political problems. And there were political problems in all of them, like no matter what. Like there's always like,
Sure.
whenever you build there's always like, human beings just have issues establishing order and hierarchy and structure in this way. But she found that the most successful ones had the strongest sense of shared spiritual or higher, like greater than themselves sense of purpose or shared belief. And so I'm kind of curious. It's like that's a challenging one, right? Like that's like, where does our sense of meaning come from? Where does our sense of where's that glue for everyone?
Yeah.
And
Sorry. Go ahead.
please, no, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it's like if someone is, has a spiritual conviction that they're in purgatory until they leave this planet and they're somewhere greater than being here, that's where they're at and that's what they believe. But as far as for people who feel a sense of belonging on this planet, or feel like this is their home and feel like this is the place where we are having this divine experience, then what is the one thing? And I'm not saying that Christians or anyone else don't also experience this. Everybody they're on some spectrum of what they believe, but like, what connects all of us beyond any of it? What you tell me, what connects us? What is the common denominator that connects all of humanity?
It's funny. I was tempted to say, something abstract like, well, we all have consciousness, but like we all come from the earth. We all come from matter. We all come like we're all like experiencing the same sort of like from the earth. We're all
Yeah,
raised up from.
our health and well-being is dependent on the landscape. Period. Simple as that. So it's like it is a first principle. Like what are the decisions we make as individuals and collectively? How does that impact the world that sustains us?
Mm.
Whether you're Muslim or Christian or atheist, like you still need the sun, you still need the ground, you still need nutrient dense food, you still need community. You can't escape your biology regardless of what you believe. You know, we see that we suffer when we don't have those things in our life. And so I think that's something that unites us all, regardless of creed.
Right. And so when you're looking at like a higher good or the greater good that you kind of like apply from a principle, it's like, how do we
Yeah.
maximize the relationship to humanity and human mm, community, human society in a way
Hmm.
that integrates with the natural ecosystem?
Yeah. And like freedom for everybody, and like, but freedom needs to be, it needs to be, we need to look at it from the lens of like, like for instance, it's like someone living upstream from us, what they're doing affects the water of the watershed that we all share, regardless of what private property lines, imaginary lines that they have, and this and that. And so like everything has to be considered. Everything has to be considered. And I think we get into trouble when freedom gets positioned as this thing where it's this isolatory thing about our choice, but like
Mm.
that non-aggression principle needs to extend beyond just what we see in our little compartmentalized world, and like every decision we make is affecting the rest. There's no real like private property is an illusion, right? It's like there's no real line that separates us from our neighbors. All the birds that feed here will migrate and land somewhere else, and they come back, and like the deer migrate from here to there, and there's a cougar that lives in like a 5 mile span around here. Like everything we do affects everything around us. And that's the way it always is and always will be. And so I think having that lens um, gives us the opportunity to take real responsibility. Nothing's isolated.
I love what you're talking about too, because I kind of had that moment where I was considering my political views. And I was like, I'd love to be a libertarian. I love this idea of like personal freedom and like do whatever you want to do as long as it's not hurting anyone else. But then I kind of thought about this, like, well, the not hurting anyone else part is a little bit vague, because when you're doing whatever the hell you want to do, it's like everything that you do has an impact on the broader system. And the more I thought about like human individualism and like that perspective of like individual liberties, the more it disconnects us from the fact that everything that we do is like an impact within the system.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, I just don't trust human beings enough to be able to call myself a libertarian. It's like, hey, I love the idea of like individual freedoms, but like individuals are kind of messed up and they're kind of self-serving, and they're going to manipulate that system to a degree, and then there's going to be all kinds of issues. And I don't want to get into any political debates on this that's not an invitation for you to like shit talk me in the comments about libertarianism. But
It's inevitable.
it is inevitable. It is inevitable because we're on the internet. But I was,
Yeah.
for the reason that I brought that up in the first place is that, I don't have like particularly strong political views, but I was thinking about that in terms of there's no such thing like an individual liberty. When you're talking about freedom, like my mind's like, well, what is freedom if we're like, if we're really submitting to the highest principle and we're aiming, like we're our aim for the highest good is the highest good of all and the
Hmm.
health of the ecosystem, and not just our personal individual benefit. Not and that's like almost like that is a spiritual principle, because that requires sacrifice of the ego, that requires sacrifice of the conditioned consumer biological imperative that wants to assert and dominate and like proliferate its genes and acquire as many resources and mates as possible, and like compete with others and try to like like just be like like me, essentially like assert the meanness onto as much as it can at the expense of other things. There's an element of that within nature, right? Like you see that, like that's a naturally occurring thing that happens within nature. Trees grow taller than other plants. The shade, the other plants don't get enough sun, and those die. There's a degree of that, but it's like to form human culture around the principle of maximal harmony within community and relationship to nature. That is a spiritual proposition.
Bingo. That's it. That's oneness. That's oneness beyond the spiritual conceptualization and woo-woo-ness. It's like literally, it's a shared breath. The air, the water, like the water that lands on my watershed, it's not my watershed, on the watershed where I live, the hydrological cycle, it's sharing everything, everyone's decisions, everything that's put into the air, into the water is being moved around and affecting everybody. You cannot fundamentally privatize anything, in my opinion. We do not own anything. We do not even own our own breath. And so that's an experience of connectivity that gives deep responsibility for how we affect everything.
Mm. And so this is so fascinating, man, because like as soon as we started to, like, I have chills from like my toes to the top of my scalp right now in terms of like realizing that this is the aim, right? Like when we're talking, what is the shared greatest good? Okay, well now we have to sort of problem solve, right? Like now that we've established, okay, that's the aim, that's the first principle, that's the direction we're going. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of problems within that. Obviously the biggest problem being, it's like, well, look at the system that we're currently operating under.
Yeah.
It does not operate by those principles whatsoever.
Sure.
Culturally, we're conditioned to not necessarily operate by those principles. If we follow those principles, we're not going to be, we're contending against, we're social creatures too, and we socially ping off other people, and we have a desire to fit in. And it's very rare to have a human being who's willing to sacrifice social acceptance temporarily for the sake of their own values being upheld or integrated or embodied. If you're going for this, it's a self-sacrifice in a big way. It's a temporary pain to sort of create a different paradigm. And I remember reading about authoritarian history a while back, and in most authoritarian political systems, the only way that an authoritarian government would be overthrown wasn't if there was like a direct rebellion. There were certain rebellions that would happen, but then there would always be some sort of backlash, and a dictator would come in and the most reliable way for an authoritarian dictatorship to sort of kind of be removed was if people built a parallel society next to the authoritarian society, and people just sort of like followed these other values and principles within their community until those values overtook the values of the authoritarian society.
Yeah.
Could be butchering that, but like that was I remember hearing about that and being like, oh, that just makes sense. We build these parallel society, and at first though, you run the risk of being like squashed by the authoritarian society or the prevailing cultural paradigm.
Yeah, that might happen, but at least you were living true.
Mm.
And I think about myself, and I'm like, well, I want to take the steps to plant the seeds for this way of being, maybe for my grandkids, maybe it's for my great grandkids. Mm-hmm. I might not see the revolution, so to speak, of the human spirit and human connection with each other in the natural world, and that shifting in values. I might not see that in my life. I see it happening. I see it happening in my little community, and like with you and these conversations we're having and stuff like this. And I think that we have to just stay focused on living true against all odds, and hopefully just planting the seeds, like just put in the work so that it can just be continued on, because it's just a continuation on. It just keeps going. Everything. There's no life. There's no death. It's all just transforming constantly. It's like that little tree that got, that was lost to the big tree and couldn't survive. Like, when did that tree die? when was it alive? Like everything always transforming, growing. It's like this endless cycle of rebirth. And I'm okay being that little tree. I'm okay being composted into the greater forest. And I think that if we can zoom out and live that way, then we can start to take some steps towards this way of being and this way of seeing.
I think that human beings don't have that inherent sense of belonging to Earth, right? I think there is a disconnect, like myself included. Hey, like until I moved to the Canadian Rockies in my mid-20s, I didn't have a strong connection to any natural principle or any outdoor element. And it
Yeah.
was that completely transformed. Like climbing mountains in the Canadian Rockies completely transformed my consciousness and my
Yeah.
realization. It was like, I'd had all these spiritual ideas of like, oh yes, we're all one because of the spirit. And then I'm like standing on top of a mountain. I'm like, oh shit. Oh, we're all okay. Um,
Yeah, you
but
find God on the top of a mountain.
yeah. But there's a gnosis that happens and a sense of belonging too that I don't think a lot of people have. I think like there's a belonging crisis where again, I think that's maybe like the compensation that people have is that craving to individuate and that craving to stand out and be special and like assert themselves because they aren't being embraced. So because of the lack of belonging and interdependence, there needs to be that strength of individuality,
Yeah,
or they just collapse and give up, right?
for
One of the
sure.
two, right?
Yeah,
They succumb to the copes and the numbing, and that society also offers. That is a huge part of our capitalist society.
yeah. All the symptoms that we see they make sense to me, and I think that when you can zoom out like that and really see how people cope and why people cope, it all makes sense, and you can have real compassion for people in light of the cards they were dealt. Like people don't have a connection to nature,
They don't.
and that's going to breed all sorts of symptoms, and so
So,
it's tough.
what would you say an entry point, especially for someone who is maybe in a city? What's the entry point for that sense of connection for people?
Man, I mean, I think that it's really tough. It depends on the city, I guess, like, in Portland, Oregon, I guess there's still trees, there's still water, there's still animals, um, there's people, like you can still step towards people. People are nature, and I don't really know. I
Mm.
don't really know, but I think it takes a stepping towards it in some way. Go learn the names of some trees around you so that when you see them, you recognize them. Simple as that. Oh, like with those birds that keep landing on your balcony in your 15-story high rise or whatever. Like who are they? What are they? Like learn their song, learn their language. Like, and then when you go out, you're like, oh, I know you. You belong. Like we're here. We share this space together. It's a magical thing, and it's all right there, right at our fingertips. Even in the concrete jungle, it's like there's freaking mushrooms busting out of the concrete and like dandelions everywhere, and all sorts of animals that are just adapting to and living within even the most concrete fortresses.
Mm.
And underneath those concrete fortresses is the earth itself, which not that long ago sustained people who lived in harmony with the planet. And so I try and have that feeling every time I go through a city. It's like there's still like it's like the earth underneath. I can always feel that. And yeah, like I said, I don't have the answers, but I know that it's like what sustains the human animal and what brings a sense of connectivity and meaning to life. I don't think that we get to change those things. I don't think we don't get to decide if we don't need sunlight. We don't get to decide if we don't need the various elements that sustain our physical structure. We don't get to decide if we don't need physical exercise. Like we just don't. That's just the way that it's transpired. And so we all need those things. So how do we ensure that we can all have those things, at least that orienting that way. If we can at least start orienting that way, then maybe we can start to put our heads together. We're very, very clever creatures,
Hmm.
you know, and
We are.
some people are doing some really cool stuff, like the large scale regenerative agriculture stuff, like Salatin and those other freaking heroes. Like that's really cool stuff.
I think one piece of my work that I got really into has been identifying all of the things that we participate in that disconnect us.
Mm.
Principally my perspective was like, what's disconnecting from you from yourself or your capacity to pay attention? What's fragmenting your psyche and fragmenting your consciousness? And the more I kind of got into it, I'm like, well, it starts with like collective fragmentation, right? We're very, very distant from each other. And then there's the individual fragmentation where we're consuming this 6-second media that fragments our capacity to pay attention to the smallest micro iota, where the gap between stimulation and dopamine has, abbreviated to milliseconds. And how can we stop participating in things that fragment us? How can we stop participating in things that disconnect us from even our ability to perceive? Because that ability of perception, most people start a meditation practice, they're stunned to discover that their mind is this runaway disaster, where if you close your eyes and you try to focus on your breath, you try to count 10 breaths back to back, you get to like breath 2 or 3 before your mind's thinking about 50 other things, or you have like 20 other images in your mind, and you're like all the way over to next Thursday. Like people don't even realize how disconnected they are from their own mind and their capacity to be present and their perception. And so like, how can you stop participating? There's that old saying, before you try to cure someone, see if they're willing to give up what made them sick in the first place. I have been a big fan of elimination, right? And so it's like, can you go a full day without your cell phone, without looking at your cell phone at all? I saw a
Mm.
podcast clip of someone recently. He was talking about how he did an experiment where he went 7 weeks without any screens at all, like zero screens whatsoever, 7 full weeks, which to most of us is unfathomable. Like we can't imagine not having our cell phones with us every day, not looking at a computer, and having zero screens for 7 weeks. How could you possibly do that? But he said when he started, like he was in like the 50th percentile for memory. He was like very like just like right in the middle. And then at the end of 7 weeks with no extra memory training, he was in like the top 1% of people for memory in the world with no memory training, just because he wasn't looking at, you know, blue light screens and like this
Yeah,
hyper
man.
dopaminergic stimulating stuff. And so how can we sort of disconnect from the disconnect is the question. And then, it's harder in a city, but like you can go out and you can go make eye contact with a bunch of people and say hi and introduce yourself. You can socially challenge yourself and break your ego apart and experience social rejection over and over until you start talking to people and making friends. And I think there's but to me, a big piece is that identification of like what are the elements of your life and of society and of your lifestyle that leave you in a numbed out state, that leave you disconnected, that are could be a soother that you're using or a
Hmm.
pacifier that's numbing you from the pain of a lack of belonging and of isolation and that lack of village connection.
Yeah. I mean, the phones are, I mean, it's becoming such a part of our world. It has become such a part of our world, but like, I just, the more because I suffer from the same things, and being on Instagram and having to constantly work through my phone now, I'm like, wow, I really got myself in a pickle here. Like getting online, I'm like, I'm like so the only way that I've been able to feel an integrity is I'm just like from my platform, I'm like, get off your fucking phone. Get off your phone. Go outside, go meet your neighbor, go dancing, go break bread with people, go plant a garden with people, go hunting with people, like go train with people. I'm like, I teach people how to train and I help them get out of pain and get strong. And I'm like, yeah, learn these, watch these videos, adhere to your program, and then get the hell off your phone and like go teach some people things. I'm telling you, it's like, this phone, I can feel my phone while I'm talking to you.
Still, you're like, oh, it's got
It's
the
right
pull,
there.
right? Yeah.
It really does. And like, I have to create real boundaries. And um, that has been really hard for me, to be honest. Um, the the constant pull on my attention, and I value my attention so much, and I spent so many years cultivating my attention. And I saw that thing you were talking about earlier, that guy who took the 7 week break, and I was like, that makes so much sense, because I feel like the phone is literally destroying attention span. And then at the same time, like my friend Seth Hughes, he says, this is where the village square is right now. And so I'm like, well, this is where the conversations are happening. And so what do we do? What do we do? Here we are. And it's a tool, but it's also like, it has so many negative aspects. Like, it's not like it's a tool and you just use it like this and that. I'm like, no. But attention and presence being so important to feeling, or to being able to navigate the landscape of oneself and our own mind, and our ability to show up fully for our kids and our families, and to just be fully here doing what we're doing. And the phone breaks that. That makes us less, it makes it harder for us to do that. And so what are we going to do?
Well, it makes it harder for us to do literally everything. And
For sure.
like I've been chronically online for the last decade or more, probably 15, 20 years since I, got into Facebook as a young adolescent. And I'm starting to notice for the first time, maybe collectively, how a larger percentage of people are feeling disillusioned with online culture,
Yeah.
and being online. And there's a movement towards like, how can we start taking this back into the real world? How can we start
Yeah.
taking social media and like just using it as like, how you used to like only use the phone to call people to make plans to hang out? How can we
Yeah.
start doing that, right? And even a lot of my own work, yes, I run an online community, but like my intention for the coming year is I have a series of in-person retreats that I'm going to be hosting. And I want to do in-person events and start, creating collective, real life, experiential
Yes.
things that we, and developing community through shared experience, not memes, you know? And
Yes.
I still think that, digital communication and digital expression is important. I don't think it's going anywhere
Yeah.
anytime soon. I think the landscape is going to change over time, but I'm starting to see that eventually the human spirit has been so frustrated and disillusioned with how fucked up being chronically online is, and how
Yeah.
utterly unhappy and unfulfilled people are, and how the illusion of these, like it used to be about like status posturing and image and all of this stuff. Like, people are craving authenticity, they're craving real community, they're craving actual experience, and they're
Mm.
sick of it. Like, they're just sick. Like, maybe I'm projecting because that's how I feel.
No, I'm with you.
you know
Yeah.
but this is something that I think like we need human connection more than ever.
Yeah. And that's why I'm trying to encourage people, is like, and even though I talk about revillaging and living for the other and the more than human world that feeds us and sustains us, but there is a level of self-cultivation that needs to happen so that we can actually be clear and healthy and be able to show up for our neighbor. Like, I'm of no use to my neighbor if I can't help myself, so like, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first. It's
Mm.
true. But in service to being helpful. And so, yeah, the in-person thing, thank you for doing that, because I think that we need to, the people who are not afraid to still meet with people in person and create authentic circles where people can be vulnerable and show up and have boots on the ground, so to speak, and hands in the dirt, and have these lived experiences, which is where it's so fulfilling to do that. And all the in-person retreats that I've helped with, and all the training people in person, I love training people in person. Like, when I train someone in person, there's a half, maybe I have horrible time management, but like, I have a half hour before where we just connect, and then after we train, a half hour where we just connect. And like, the people that I train in person become deep kin to me. There's this deep sharing, and I think it's going to become more and more a novel thing that we have to hold to, moving towards the in-person real life experience, instead of this augmented reality, which it seems like that's continuing to snowball faster and faster. I'm not super hip to where it's going, except I know that it's happening.
Mm.
And what I unfortunately think is going to happen is people are going to become even more disconnected, even more unwell, and it's going to backfire on our species. But there's just nothing like being with people in person
There's not.
and keeping it real. That's just, yeah. And in the context of nature, like, well, we should figure out stuff to do together around that at some point. That would be fun.
I reckon. Yeah, I reckon we can jam on that and figure that
Yeah.
out. That's another big piece of, an intention of my work going forward is, a lot of my work has been so centered around health for most of my life. And then, kind of coming to the realization that like you can't have health without the health of the ecosystem. Because, if you're just doing monoculture crops and spraying it all with pesticides and depleting the soil, it's like you're sort of destroying the life-giving qualities of the food that we're eating. And
Yep.
then, that was like a big aha moment for me. But then even just like seeing the mental health effects of people just being in nature, seeing the
Hmm.
capacity of like a person to actually confront a bunch of things that they're avoiding when they get quiet in the woods. They leave their phone at home and they go set up a tent for 3 days.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, like every problem that they had seems like a joke because they got quiet for 3 fucking minutes.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think this is the direction that more people are. I don't think it's gonna, like you said, we might not be alive to ever see this reach critical mass in terms of a sort of a cultural paradigm that takes over. I think that especially with the advent of AI, we have this brilliant opportunity to outsource so many. We have the opportunity to use AI to connect us more to nature in a weird way, where we could outsource a lot of jobs. We could use it to solve a lot of existential problems and societal problems. But the direction that it seems to be going is that we'll see. We'll see. I'm always kind of curious to see what humanity does with super high powered technologies that are reaching a crescendo of their own development. But
Yeah. I mean, I'd be curious to hear some. I don't have enough information to have any real opinion. What I do know is that like it takes huge amounts of energy
enormous.
to have all those things going, and like, what are we going to do about that? You know,
Yeah.
like all our technology, all the things that to make our technology real are outsourced to landscapes that we're not connected to, where people live and animals live, and there's just suffering everywhere, so that we can have instantaneous information. And I'm like, is it worth it?
Well, especially because like, what are you doing with the information, right? Like, I think again, what's fascinating is that we could be using this technology to extend our capacity to think and solve problems. However, what's the likelihood that we're going to do that? I remember reading this really great sci-fi story called The Last Question by a guy named Isaac Asimov. And the premise was basically there was this like massive, like, like huge field-sized factory, containing this massive supercomputer that could solve every problem. But the last question that it couldn't solve was, how do we reverse entropy? So it was solving all these problems of like human. It was like it created this technology that, it sent this little disk out into space and it harnessed energy from the sun, and we basically had infinite energy on Earth. But then eventually the sun ran out. And then it just, then it's, this thinking computer figured out how to solve interplanetary travel. And we traveled to all these different solar systems, like basically absorbing all these suns all the way until the end, until the last star in the entire universe was burned out. This last question is like, how do we reverse this? How do we reverse entropy? And I'm not going to spoil the ending to anyone who wants to read that story, but even just not thinking that far out, where it's like we're thinking about when the sun's going to burn out and we have to find a new planet to live on while we're still on this planet. Like, AI could be used to solve existential environmental issues by helping us develop technologies that can provide solutions for regenerative agriculture, that can solve energy crises. Are we going to use it for that? I'm doing AI generated pictures of like Renaissance paintings of a dog fighting a cat, you know. You know, like
Yeah, and we're constantly creating problems that we have to solve for with technology. It's this insane way. Yeah,
and so you know, I think one of the things that I've kind of come to realize is that no matter what, humanity is going to do what it's going to do. We're going to make
true.
all kinds of errors, and like we're not stopping AI. We're not going to be like, guys, like this is consuming oceans of water to cool these systems and inordinate amounts of power every time you use ChatGPT. Doesn't matter. We're still going to continue to scale this up, and because it's like it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's going to continue. Like that's the highest principle that humanity is operating under right now. So what's
Yep.
the parallel society that we can create alongside of that? How can we, you know, if we are going to have these technologies that are going to continue to grow and they're going to continue to be leveraged and they're going to continue to be used, can we use them in a way, in the same way that's like, you know, you're using your phone to get people off their phone? Can we use AI to solve the problems that AI is causing? Can we use these technologies and integrate technologies as part of our own ecological system, ecological community, as part of our own humanity? Because that is, you know, like I we can sit here and be like, well, this is fucked. We shouldn't be doing this. Well, we are. Okay, we are. What now? We aren't going to stop this train. How can we build other tracks for it? That's my
True.
perspective anyway.
I totally agree. I don't want to be naive, and I want to be adaptable, and I think that we don't have a choice. Like you're saying, that's just the choiceless choice. We have to figure out how to adapt amidst the wave of technology that keeps swelling. So it's interesting times. I'm really
Yeah.
curious. I live like somewhere in between this, like, like there's like the prepper in me that's just like just so is on high alert on some level, or I'm just like, I want to be prepared for whatever. And then I'm also very optimistic, and um yeah, kind of watching and doing my best to just continue to step towards real life with real people, with the natural world around me, and not just the natural world around me, with just the people, with just everything around me. um yeah, I'm in a phase of just a lot of deep acceptance, I feel.
Mm.
Deep, a lot of letting go. um and yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive for sure.
To put it simply, eh?
Yeah.
So, you know, right before we started, I'm gonna do a little speed round with you. Right before we started our call, you said there are certain ways that you're finding yourself change in your life right now. What are those ways, and like, what are you changing from, and what are you changing to?
Well, I am so disciplined. I can be so rigid in my routines and my practice, um, how I think things should be, how I hold the people around me, expectations I have. And um, I mean, for instance, right now for myself, I realize I'm not letting down and just enjoying myself and having fun enough. I'm just like on the boom, boom, boom. So logistical. It's like trading off the kids, doing my work. My wife is in birth work, doing her work. And there's this collide in my experience of me holding to like what I think Fal should be doing to support what I'm doing. And like we get into this, like we're living on separate islands trying to fight for time for what we're trying, this and that. And like, um, just losing I've been losing touch with just the preciousness of the moment, and like there's this deep acceptance for who my wife is, her magic, and how important it is to support her and what she's bringing to the world, which is really important work. um and like more merrymaking. I'm giving myself the opportunity to actually not go to bed at 8 p.m. every night with the sun and get up and do my practice. I'm going out, I'm dancing with my friends. We have a really cool folk scene and like folk dances, and um, I have just an amazing community And I've been so I'm like, yeah, they're like, when are you coming? When are you coming? When are you going to come dance? And when are you going to stay up with us, and just have fun and be jolly, And I'm like, well, but circadian biology. It's like, whatever, dude. It's like it's its own nourishment to connect intimately and joyfully and be elated and just be delighted, like stepping outside of my rigid dietary patterns, freeing up my movement practice, just shaking up my routine has been really, really healthy for me. Letting go of the rigidity, which is my strength and it's also my weakness. And so I'm just dancing more, honestly. Doing a lot more dancing, and I feel like it's helped with, nothing else has changed in my world around the stress of being on my phone or having to work at a distance or provide money to buy food so that my kids can eat, all these things, but just the relaxing into the merrymaking has been so profoundly healing for me. And I feel so much more at ease.
I think, like you said, there's that spiritual nourishment that we sometimes forget when we get caught up in the seriousness or the responsibility of life. Because, hey, we got to work, we got to eat, we got to do things, we got to take care of each other, we got to get shit done. And I used to have this false dichotomy too, where I called it the Spartan and the artist were always kind of at odds with each other, where, my two career paths at one point was I was like, I'm either going to be a world-class personal trainer or a world-class performing musician. And I tried to do both at the same time many times. And I'd be out until 2 or 3 in the morning playing music and then up training a client at 6 or 7 in the morning. Just oh, I can't do this, man. And I'm actually it's funny because I'm going through an opposite cycle. I got here to Tulum, and I was experiencing this burgeoning social life as soon as I got here. And this is after some a period of pretty intense social isolation, was very, very in my routines, was trying to recover from this sort of dip that I had in my life. And I get to Tulum and I'm just whoa, there's so much going on. There's so many people. There's so much community. There's so much music. And there was a lot of merrymaking and not a lot of making anything else. So yeah, having to right now, it's funny because this week I'm all right, I'm going to get up with the sunrise every morning this week. I'm going to be in bed. I'm going to have my phone off by 8 o'clock every night this week. And I'm going to, get back to my routines, and I'm going to be back in my circadian biology. I actually said I'm going to spend less time with people and more time with myself. And you have these ways that you find balance.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I do think that unless you have a joie de vivre, unless you have if you're, it's sort of the paradigm that I think is coping versus thriving, where it's if you're coping your way through life or you're surviving your way through life or you're just kind of gritting your teeth through life. It's kind of why are you living? What are you doing?
Life is for living. Yeah. Life is for living. And it's not that just for context, I haven't abandoned my routines. I'm still my goddamn disciplined self. I just allow myself Wednesday nights. I go Wednesday nights, 10 minutes down the drive to my neighbor's house where all my friends gather, and we play music and we dance. And it's just that has brought so much more balance to my life that I'm oh, I've really been neglecting that aspect of my practice. That's a part of my practice too. Mm-hmm. There's no separation between any of it. And so it's I can get into this deep martyr state where I'm just no, I'm suffering and I'm making this happen. It's for my family and it's for the future and this and that. And it's I lose track on the merrymaking, which is its own spiritual practice that feeds life and connects you to your community. And then from there, in that place where we show up and we dance and we sing, then we sit in council every 2 weeks in a talking circle and we talk about what we need and what we desire and what we dream. And then that formulates the next step to actually planting trees and doing the things we want to do together to create this world of regeneration. And so it's all connected, Yeah. And more dancing.
Yeah, man. Well, because at the end of the day, if we're trying to build a world for our grandkids, are we building a world where they're also martyrs and they're also just we gotta
exactly?
It's is that the future that we want for them? Are we gonna live that future now? I think that, yeah, again, the word that keeps coming to mind is joie de vivre. And like, I used to put it in my schedule because it's like I have to keep a schedule for myself or I just kind of crumble. But I would leave these open blocks where it's like, or just call it structured spontaneity. Right?
Mm,
It's like you're gonna call some random person, you're gonna try and hang out with them, or like I would schedule a night out where I'm going to a jam night, and I'm picking up my guitar and I'm performing my songs, or I'm something to nourish my soul. It's in there, and I can't have like just productive time on my calendar. I need to have that structured spontaneity in there as well. Otherwise, my soul is just snuffed.
yeah, it's real.
It's real.
Yeah, and we go through seasons, right?
Mhm.
It's all seasons. There's seasons to our movement practice. There's seasons to everything. And I think that when we can live seasonally, it's like it's the same way like in nature. Everything's always constantly in flux, and there's a lot to tend to and a lot to pay attention to, and we have to be adaptable. And you know, at some point, I might go full hermit and just delete my
Yeah.
Instagram. Watch.
Which I wouldn't blame you if you did, man. At some point, right? You build enough of a community around you, and you're like, all right, we're good.
You'll have my phone number when it happens.
Yeah, exactly. I hope so. So, if you were going to extract, like, man, we covered a lot of ground. So, first of all, thanks. This was
Yeah,
an
that was fun.
awesome
We didn't have no
conversation.
plan, too.
I
Yeah.
know. We went to some pretty cool places, even some like philosophical edges that are kind of like still a
Yeah.
little crunchy for me that I want to revisit.
Same.
But if you were going to extract one takeaway for people from this, like practically, if you were going to encourage people to start living in a different way, what would be the one takeaway that you would hope that people wander out of this conversation or this podcast with?
It would be that you belong here on this planet and you're not an alien. And yeah, you belong. Like you're important. You're important here. Like what you do has an impact. And you can find meaning through the choices you make, knowing that you're either supporting the other or not. And I think that that's enough. I think that that can be enough. And just if you're having trouble finding meaning, be helpful. I think being helpful, just orienting towards living for the other is brings such deep, like anytime I just have that inspiration to like give whatever change I have in my pocket to whoever's suffering on the street, like just that feeling, like just stepping towards people, um, and cultivating that heart is, I think, a really revolutionary thing, and it stands in opposition to what seems to be the narrative that gets pushed, at least through social media. And so, a really radical thing is just to step towards your neighbor, be really, really courageous, and step towards your neighbor,
Mm-hmm.
and then recognize that you are nature, and that healing comes from nature. And we overcomplicate things so deeply. I've said a number of things. You told me to say one thing.
This is the essence.
There is no one thing.
There you go. That's the one thing.
Yeah. Don't leave a stone left unturned. Um, yeah, more merrymaking, and it's like and just doing what you can. Do what you can, and be easy on yourself.
Yeah. Man, replay that, guys. Just rewind back, listen to that a couple times, write out a few different ways that you can actually start living that and embodying that in your own life. Doing something for other people, again, without being a martyr, I think, is
Mm.
that really big piece. And that's the merrymaking elements. Like, in your life, go do like three good things for other people. Go produce something of value. Use the knowledge and wisdom that you have. Like, use your experience to share with others and help them solve problems that you've solved before. Go walk a granny across the street, right? Go give someone $10 who looks hungry. I had a mentor who used to say, rather than give a homeless person $10, he used to go to like a person who's working some like minimum wage job, who's clearly working their ass off to support a family, and he would just give them $50. And that would just be like, whoa, like this is huge, huge impact on this person who's really, really working hard. You could see that was like really making a difference for them and for their family and really bringing them forward. And so, doing a bunch of things for other people without being a martyr, with that merrymaking, with finding that sense of belonging, purpose, connection, not just to yourself, but to the broader environment. Man, this was such an inspiring conversation. I'm so lit up right now.
Let's go dancing.
That's it, man. Let's go dance. So, guys, this is the Conscious Grounding Podcast. If you guys had these big breakthrough aha moments like I did in this conversation, let me know what it was in the comments. Where do you find your sense of belonging? What's your connection to community, with yourself, with nature? Do you have questions for us? Did you disagree firmly with anything that we said, except for about me not being a libertarian? And let us know. Let us know in the comments section. And if you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review, leaving a comment really, really helps. And obviously, if you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, leave a little comment, leave a little thumbs up. It really, really helps the algorithm, really helps the visibility. And I think these conversations are awesome and more people should hear them. So do your boy a favor, send this out to the people who you love, who you think would enjoy this podcast. Send this to your community, and let's grow the community a little bit more. If you want to learn more about Tim's offers, he has some fantastic offers. I'm going to leave all the links for his Instagram that he's probably going to delete later, and his the website to go check out his online community. I'm going to leave all of that in the description of this episode below. And guys, thank you so much for listening to the Conscious Grounding Podcast. We will catch you on the next episode. Tim, dude, 10 out of 10, man. Thank you so much for this.
I love you, bro. Thank you.
Right back at you.